right in the kisser.
How the devil are you? Anyway, look. Ooh, got the Aiyima A70 mono amps. And they sent me two, thank goodness, so I can test them properly. Now, I've been putting these through their paces, and what I can say straight from the off is they sound really good. However, I do think they're trying to be too many things, and we'll talk about that through the course of this video. Anyway, let's get them out of the box. Okay, let's have a little look around the amp. So first of all, let's look at the specs. So it's using the TPA 3255 amp chip and the NE5532 op amps. And you can replace the op amps, and it's giving you some options there, and so on. Okay, distortion is 0.001%. Now I think it's got two signal to noise ratios, potentially because it has an RCA gain switch plus 6 dB. So this one is with the plus 6 dB switched off, and this one is with the plus 6 dB switched on. I'm thinking that's what it probably is. Because when you put this plus 6 dB on, it will give a little bit more noise. Although when I switched it over, it wasn't detectable to my ears, and I preferred it with the plus 6 dB gain switch switched over, personally anyway. But there we are. So here we've got subwoofer frequency. Now this is for a passive sub. So underneath, let's see if I can find it now. Oh, there we are. It has okay, PFFB, negative feedback circuit. Good to see that. Excellent. Fan flip-tastic. So underneath you got this little switch. So when you switch it across to the left, it becomes just a subwoofer amplifier for a passive sub. And you use this volume control for that passive sub. I'm not 100% sold on that. I mean, most people don't use passive subs. I do have a passive sub. But do I want to, I don't know whether I want to just get an amplifier and a passive sub on its own. I think if you want to use it as because they recommend, I'll just show you, I'll come to that in a second. They recommend you can use these amps in a 7.1 channel setup for a home cinema. I'll come to that in a second. So perhaps it's for that if you wanted to run a passive sub that, but I'm not sure. Then you've got the question of a volume control on a mono amp. Now, most mono amps, they don't have volume controls, and the volume is controlled by the preamp or DAC or whatever you're going to use. So what I recommend, if you're going to use these in mono mode, just two of them, whack both the volumes up to full and let the preamp do the work of the volume. Now, some people question why they've got a volume on it, and I think, I'm looking at this, I think I know why. So if I go here, you can see they're showing a setup of having 8 amplifiers. powering all these different speakers. I think this would be a very difficult thing to set up, but potentially you could use this volume to dial in your speakers separately. So perhaps you want your center channel to be louder than your front, left and rights. So you'd have the center channel maybe a little bit louder. Maybe your rear surrounds you want a bit quieter, so you could dial them in a little bit quieter, etc, etc. And then you could use one for a passive sub and switch it over and just use it specifically just for a passive sub and use that knob on the front to dial it in. But I think this would be very difficult to do, and I don't think the instructions are clear on how you would set this up. So, and going back at this, so we can see here, it says subwoofer output. So you can either use it for an amplifier or amplifier plus passive speakers or a powered sub. So it's doubling up as a kind of preamp, I guess. So what I'm assuming is, and I'm only making assumptions here because again, it's not clear. If you wanted to do this setup, potentially you could daisy chain. You'd have your preamp here with HDMI arc on the back. And then you would connect one channel here, one channel here, and then daisy chain all these amps, potentially for the other speakers, using this sub out there to the RCA in. I'm guessing. Is that what it is? Let me know in the comment section. Do you think I'm on the right track? So there you go. But again, this setup will be a bit bonkers. Anyway, and then we've got, so thankfully, so when you do, let's go back to that switch. So you switch to full frequency, which it comes by default switched over to that. So you've got your full frequency switched on, and then you can connect your subwoofer. Right, so you got your subwoofer, but then, so you got your powered sub. And then you've got this subwoofer frequency for your powered sub. Now, again, this is a little bit of a misnomer because most powered subs that I've ever had do have a crossover on the back of them. So there's really, and you set that crossover to what you want it and leave it as it is. Potentially, I suppose it does give you an option. Rather than going behind the subwoofer all the time, you can just do it on the amp here. But there's not really any need for that. I think just a sub out will be fine. I don't think you need a crossover. I mean, there are on occasion I've come across small subwoofers that just have a volume on them and there's no crossover on them, but they're quite rare. And 99.9% of most powered subs do have their own crossover on them. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, I'd rather see a switch on there, like a high pass filter, which you plug your sub in and it automatically does it, or switch, whatever. High pass filter where you could switch over. So it takes some of that bass, the below, you could set it to maybe cut off around 80 hertz or 100 hertz, around there, to your passive speakers. So the sub is doing all the work. I'd like to see that in some of these amps, rather than just a sub out or this crossover. Anyway, there you go. So there's some confusing elements of this amp, which I think, hopefully I've addressed. Anyway, there you go. Right, so it says here that the maximum power output, 300 watts into 4 ohms with a 48 volt 5 amp. Yet when you go down here, it says 48 volt 5 amp into 4 ohms is 240 watts. So I don't know. And you need the 10 amp to get 300 watts. However, into 6 ohms and 8 ohms is identical, okay? I'd recommend using the 48 volt 5 amp for definite. I wouldn't go any lower than that. I wouldn't go to a 36 volt 6 amp. I wouldn't bother with that. Definitely stick with the 48 volt 5 amp. And into 8 ohms you get 150 watts. Into 6 ohms you get in 225. Okay, that's all well and good. But do they sound good? Well, I've already kind of given it away at the beginning of this video. Yes, they do sound good. But how do they compare to other amps? So what I've done a sound test, because if any of you have been watching me for some time, you know I love a sound test. Do you know that utilitarian TV? Ah, yeah, I know him. Bit annoying, really. Yeah, that's the one. But he does love a sound test. Oh, fair play. Who are those guys? I don't know. Anyway, right, so I'm going to compare these A70. I keep going to call them A07s. Oh, too many 7s and O's. These A70 monos against the SMSL Raw HA1 all-in-one amplifier. And I'm going to be using the SMSL Raw DAC 1 as the preamp for both of them. So the Raw DAC 1 will be doing the volume duties, okay, and the DAC duties to make it a fair comparison. Anyway, have a listen to this. Okay, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. I think the A70s were better, personally. I do think I use the HA1 as my desktop amp. So you could say I've got a bit of bias there towards the SMSL HA1. I do like it. But I did think the Aiyimas sounded better. I think they had, I don't know, a little bit of a better soundstage. I say definitely got more bottom end grunt and slightly more detailed, especially in the upper mids. When it comes to center imaging, I couldn't distinguish between them. But I do think overall, the A70s were better than the SMSL HA1. Now, from memory, I think these are as good as the V3 monos. So if you can overcome their quirks, you know, these odd things about them, okay, they really do make for a good pair of amps. I think I can recommend them anyway. I got no qualms in recommending these. They sound great, okay? You just got to get past all the weirdness. Once you're past that, you're fine. They sound good. Anyway, that's all for today. I'll catch you in the next one.